Henry asked me to be brief and to be funny, so I'll try to be brief, and we'll see about the funny part. Henry is a partner in Henry Smith Miller Architects in New York, and their range of work is really extensive. Excuse me, yes, Henry Smith Miller and Hawkinson. That was the first joke. The range of work is really extensive, and in fact, Henry promised me tonight that he would begin with culture and would end with war. So this would be a real hook. But the thing that I want you to pay attention to is that throughout this work, and it's been ongoing for more than 25 years now, there is a fierce intelligence at work which shows itself in many ways, but one of the more significant ways is in the consideration, the precise articulation of construction, which throws the quotidian away and forces us to reinvestigate the built landscape and the built environment in fundamentally new ways. So please join me in welcoming Henry Smith Miller.
Oh, good.
Stop that too.
Yeah, that was perfect. So I'm really glad to be here in this wonderful building. And today I'm going to be presenting a form of CV, or curriculum vitae, of our practice. Actually, it's a selection of built and unbuilt projects. Some, like this video of the outdoor cinema and amphitheater for the North Carolina Museum of Art, are historically interesting, and others represent our current work. We are interested in architecture informed by a nation's culture, one that suggests a certain optimism, lightness, and beauty. Now, if I can make this thing work. This was an animation that we built in 1984. It was for the North Carolina Museum of Art. It was very, very early, at the beginning of computers, and actually takes you through a project that we later built. But I want you to notice that the actual film is mapped on the surface of the projection screen in North Carolina. See, this is too complicated for me. Gotta go here. Our office is downtown in Soho. We understand it to be a studio for the investigation of architectural design and production. The plus sign added to our initials, SMH for Smith Miller plus Hawkinson, purposely alludes to the collaborative nature of our practice. Our studio is a long and narrow loft, actually once two buildings, built just after the Civil War and joined sometime in the 30s. The open plan supports all sorts of activities: model building, full-scale mock-ups, conferences, and solitary work. There are 3 libraries: theory and history, product research, and publications relating to our work. I've got to figure out how to make this thing work here. We thought to categorize our work in terms of human endeavors, as in live and work, work and learn and play and connect. Under live, I present West 53rd Street. I saw some work that dealt with housing today. It was very interesting. A low-rise, high-density, multi-unit condominium in Midtown. Our house at Sagaponack, a not-so-typical suburban single-family house, and 2 projects for historic landmarks districts, an ex-urban house for a famous architectural theorist, Ken Frampton, and 2 loft interiors. 405 West 53rd Street is low-rise and high-density, located in Hell's Kitchen in Midtown, New York. Its folded skin suggests oblique views east and westward, actually a hybrid project, part conventional apartment tower with elevator core and fire stair, and partly a highly unconventional stack of maisonette and townhouses embedded in a Le Corbusier-inspired, what was the name? Real guy, the Russian one? Anyway, never mind. Corbusier-inspired skip-stop and floor-through dwelling units. As a New Yorker, I'm keenly aware of the two rivers that flank Manhattan Island and thought to make reference to both by folding the skin. At the building's westernmost end, across from a small schoolyard, I cast an outdoor balcony and recess. This is kind of interesting. I'm going to get off the computer and start looking at the slides. Basically, we were looking at housing in the city of New York, and we discovered that there was a precedent in the form of the Brooklyn townhouse with a grand, we call it a brownstone. Stair goes up the main floor, but we noticed there was a second, the building was recessed from the street, and there was a courtyard in front. Later, in the Upper East Side, we discovered that some of those types had been modified to remove the grand stair, but the sort of courtyard remained in front. And then we found Philip Johnson at work doing a virtual courtyard. That is a completely flat facade with a brick wall and a wooden door that actually enters directly into a two-story townhouse. On the other side, the back side, where the garden is, actually it's the same arrangement, but he flattened the facade. I'm going to show you a precedent. This is in Barcelona. This is actually a folded skin of the building, but it's inhabitable. You can see that there are decks here. This is important for us because not only could you occupy the space of the facade, but the wooden shutters actually manage privacy and also the environment. In this building we used a glass wall to do similar things. Oh, this is, I don't know if I can make this go. Wait, hold on. I've got to do something here and there. So we made all our own kinds of animations to describe the kind of effect of walking down the street and seeing how the actual building would appear north, south, east, west. Early wireframe perspective shows some very interesting beginnings. One, his is the folded facade, kind of like Alto's work. And at the bottom, you can see in here that the townhouses or the masonettes are pushed into the building with a ground floor of courtyards and spaces. There's a main entrance here for cars, shared, and also for people coming into the apartment tower. In the model, we began to look at, so you can see this as a kind of screen. We were trying to figure out what to do with the ground floor, because actually there was no precedent for that in New York City. These diagrams attempt to identify the simplex tower and the masonettes here, which have duplexes that run through, plugged together like this. And we found there was a tremendous variety of units within this 6 or 7 story high building. This is one of my favorite drawings. Please don't look at the people. Basically, there's an entrance on the grade. This is the maisonette that runs to a rear yard garden. Downstairs is parking, so when you come in, you can go upstairs to your maisonette and the bedrooms. The key thing is we managed, in a 7-story building, to have only 2 common corridors. These are these famous skip stop, where you come in off the corridor, go upstairs to bedroom floor that runs all the way through, and vice versa. So I don't pretend to be a green architect, but this building actually has cross ventilation on every floor. And as I said, it's incredibly efficient. This is my favorite thing, but I got to figure out how to make it work. There. The marketing people decided to try to unpack our building. So they made an animation of all these pieces coming apart. It was never really finished because they realized that it was probably not going to be understood very well by the public that was going to buy the building. This is the interior is important to us. This is actually the lobby, and you'll notice that all the oblique surfaces actually make it very hard for somebody to understand how deep or how wide or the real size of the space you're in. It produces a kind of slipping and sliding that gives it a tremendous amount of animation to the kind of volume of the space. It was an architectural record. We just put these up because you can see that the bedrooms are joined, the bedroom joins the living room behind this common skin. Now, there's something going on here which is really very special I want to point out to you. From the distance, remember I talked about the Barcelona building having slats? Well, this is a very intelligent glass window wall. And in fact, it has embedded film in the spandrel. That's the bottom part of the glass here, so that when you come from the front door, you can see the entire view. This is looking down, and you can begin to see the effect that the actual spandrel becomes cloudy. I think it's best shown in this particular slide. So that as you change your relationship, just as it happens outside on the street, as you change your relationship to the glass wall inside your apartment, it becomes more obscure, so you have a sense of privacy. The other item was, I was very concerned about people occupying residential buildings in New York City, and these are actually square parallel projected sash that are opened by the individuals in the building, which animates the facade much like in a pixelated fashion to give life to it. Where's Waldo, you know? This shows you all the units, right? Each one, and actually the courtyards and the little bedrooms that are at street level. So the masonettes are actually embedded under the crenellated upper stories of the building. Suburbia. We were commissioned to do a part of a development called Sagaponic, and I think this is our project. One of the interesting things about it, although it looks like there's plenty of green in between all these houses, one of the problems of the suburbia, of course, is the front yard. But we don't have any front yard. You have to drive up, and there's actually a solid wall, and the building is built around the idea of a courtyard. But I thought to show you the project I was thinking about, which is the Oliver House by Schindler, somewhere in Los Angeles. And actually, it's a deconstructed house with stairs go up to the roof. There's a little piece of roof here, a big window, and so on. Well, we were thinking in similar terms of having a stair, a solid wall to protect you from the street, and other aspects of this house as a kind of deconstructed dwelling. And in fact, from the street, the bedrooms, which are behind this wall, there's a corridor, have no view to the south. They pick up skylights. There is a common room upstairs where the owner has a study, so he or she can look down at the front yard. And oh yes, there's this weird courtyard and wall which protects the interior court from being seen from the street. The project reverses itself and becomes almost all glass into the courtyard, which has a swimming pool. And the glass upstairs actually is full height from the bedrooms. There is a balcony out here that obscures the view as you're looking up. So just as the spandrel worked on the 53rd Street project, we're using architectural elements to condition the windows. This is supposed to be an animation, I guess. Oh yeah. Historic buildings somewhere. It's hard for me to work like this. There it is. This is Brooklyn Heights. We were asked to do a very small building made out of brick for a developer in a historic landmark district. So I took a look at the oriel window, which is customary to the brownstone, and repeated it on the facade, which was creased. The thing I like about this particular project is when you come into the building, you look up and you can see the wall of brick going straight up, because the slats of the louvers of the canopy actually are angled in such a way to allow you to possess the entire facade on your way in. However, on your way out in the morning, going to work, the slats keep the sun from going into your eyes. Often you've seen projects like this. Our project actually made it to the New York Times. It's called The Rock of Tribeca. And we had a commission. This guy owned 1.5 buildings on Leonard Street, right next to the Herzog and de Meuron Tower that got stopped. And so he wanted to be able to he realized that by code he could put more building volume on top of this building. So I had this really interesting problem of proportion and scale. We began to think about we had to make drawings that showed you how much you would see from the street, because the Landmarks Commission thinks about that. So we made drawings where actually the new addition is sitting right on top and is transparent, and you can see both at the same time. We discovered that there was another part of the law which allows people to have balconies and escape routes that are not considered building volume, but can be inhabited. And so this became a kind of scrim that wrapped around the top of the building and the sides. It formed a kind of rock when you looked at it from the street. We began to study folded screens to see about relative densities, and then finally came up with a scheme. This is looking up through the bottom of the apartment and seeing these spaces. This is its final portrait. It was approved 100% by the City of New York and not built. This is Kenneth Frampton's house in upstate New York. Jose's been there. It's a tiny house. Guy Nordenson, the structural engineer, wanted to support it on a single titanium column. Ken said no, he wouldn't want to do that. These couple of pictures show the detail with which we think about windows and views. And in fact, this particular project was a very simple box about the size of a, RV that was taken into the country, but we put openings that we planned together to see certain views. And there was a house actually down on the right over here that we didn't like, so Ken and I took a large ladder and put it in the site. I held on the ladder and he got up high and he decided where we should put the house exactly. We also do a lot of interiors. This is a room divider front door for Murray Moss, who's a very famous design person. This is another kind of operation, inside lofts. Speculative projects and urban design. This is a neoclassical, actually 1927 brick building, and we were asked to build a tower on top of it. This is what it looks like. Now comes the fun. If I get it go. This has sound. Come on. It didn't go. Shit. I don't hear any sound. Hold on, my sounds. Can you hear this? So, as part of our presentation to the community, we thought this particular building would become a member of the community of Union Square. And we decided to make an animation to show it in real time, performing as a kind of actor in the urban life. So this is very complicated to make. We had to get to the roof of the building, shoot the traffic in film, then project the traffic on a dome over the virtual model, right? And then, of course, take a movie of the facade, reflective facade of the building in the virtual dome. One thing you'll notice is that people are going pretty rapidly. We sped up the movie because actually real time is a little slow. When Tom Main came to our studio and I showed him this animation, he said, "Well, who did that?" And I pointed to somebody in the studio, and he offered a first-class ticket to Santa Monica. Fortunately, she didn't go. But as I said, our studio is kind of an experimental workshop where we do a lot of things that you do here in school, but we carry them through in practice. This always looks like roaches going up the building face. So as you can see in this kind of detailed animation here, the building only exists in its reflection, and the rest of the city isn't there at all, is it? So we temper our presentation to match our theoretical premise, and actually we do that with real buildings. Proportion. This is the neighboring building, the W Hotel. And we found all kinds of remarkable similarities between the existing sort of neoclassical building and our reinterpretation. In Soho, we completed a whole building from the ground up, only to have it stop because of the economy. It was very tall. Done work in Telluride, Colorado. Worked in different places under different situations. This is a project on the East River, part of which has been built. And the actual drawing talks about it's in addition to the top of an existing hospital and a physician's tower on top of the FDR Drive. One of the things I was keenly interested in is the kind of architecture that goes on at the edge of the city island and the large span that happens, for example, at the Queensboro Bridge, which also happens with regard to our addition. So I brought this kind of very large architectural effort to go across the FDR Drive with bridges and so on. The skin of this building, because it was facing east, we worked with Borough Happold to make sure, having spent 3 days in this hospital, having my hips fixed, I was keenly aware of what happens at 4:30 in the morning when the sun comes up in your eyes. So I put a scrim on the outside of the building to mediate the east sun in the morning. This is the project as it will be completed. This is an existing building. This is an addition. And basically, we weren't allowed to cross the street. As Amanda Burden's very interested in keeping the streets open to the rivers. So we carried the frieze or the cornice across the top and down the side and over. Fortunately, in the existing plan, this was what we call a skin job. Somebody else had already done the plan of the building. They hired us to get by the planning commission. So by maintaining a kind of continuity across both buildings, we actually bridged the street. Corning, some of you have been there. This is actually a project that's more about looking from the inside to the outside. We thought the landscape was actually part of the exhibit. There are lots of luscious materials. This is a digital theater with a glass end, which comes from Vertov's Man with a Movie Camera, in which the story of Man with a Movie Camera is about making a film. Well, in this case, we had a big shutter at the end of the theater that went up and down, so as people went up the ramp and came down and got in to get ready to watch the film, and the next group of people ready to go in would see those other people going in, and the audience, actor reversal would take place. Corning allowed us to do that. This is simply a very large performing arts center. In Lower Manhattan, we won an international competition for a women's museum. We're very interested actually in the relationship of what portion of our site actually was visible by Lady Liberty. And we found a volume in the building's, volume within the building site that actually it's over here, where all those rooms would be united or tied to the Statue of Liberty. Needless to say, that project didn't go ahead either. This is in North Carolina. This is where we actually put culture on the outside of a building. We made an amphitheater, a performing arts space that mirrored the Eurocentric European collection that was inside the Ed Stone building. Tom Pfeiffer has since made an addition to that. The military. I took this picture because the project I'm going to show you is all about movement. These are two projects which are based on the idea that nobody ever gets out of the car, and if they do, they get arrested. These are border stations. And I was very interested in a kinetic event of coming from Canada, coming to a stop, handing in your passport, and moving on, and bringing a kind of lightness to that experience, although it can be quite frightening to be in that moment where your nationality is challenged. And I felt that the design that we should do should be much like the Boeing airplane. The most beautiful, most precise, the most wonderful, the most light, the most open kind of architecture to greet our northern visitors. In any case, this is actually the booth with a guy in it. And you can see that the structure is very thin and actually non-orthogonal, producing a kind of nomadic steel roof lid on the situation. This is the border. The border is in here. This was the existing, we're going to fly over in a minute the new site, so I'm going to take you through this. That's Canada, the border. This is the whole business was you come in if you're a truck, you come in this way. This is the old-fashioned. If you're a car, you come in this way. Basically, if you get in trouble, you get pulled over and so on. I went up there and I decided to take some pictures before we began work, and I noticed that the facade of the building was completely in shadow. And people made jokes about Darth Vader, but I thought about Palladio's Teatro in Vicenza, Teatro Olimpico, where Palladio knew that the north side of the building would have no sun. So he decided not to put any ornament on that side of the building. Well, that historical fact led me to think about what it is to be on the north side of a building that never gets any light. And there's the picture. You can't see anything. So basically, I wanted to have something which was be more, welcoming. And this is a sketch of actually the north wall of the building, seemingly in glass, and there's some key parts to this. There's a skylight behind the glass facade that picks up the southern sun, right? So the sun comes from the south, strikes the back of the north-facing glass, and illuminates the entire thing, including somebody sitting here at a desk. The integration of actually the environment, solar, furniture design, foundations, structure, it's all in that sketch, and later turned into a real project. To convey that idea, of course, we had to go to various things like 3D Max and to figure out how to show the federal government and Homeland Security how delightful this would be. Well, they weren't very much concerned about delight. We produced very large drawings showing the different roadways. This is one of the most telling slides I have. I found it this morning about 2 o'clock. This is the existing facade designed by an architect from Florida, facing north, barely legible. Here's the new replacement facade with the sunlight coming from the southwest through the back and orchestrating the channel glass. Combination of lightness and nomadic structure, canopy, and different materials, all alluding to kind of the architecture of the roadway. We thought originally that these canopies would have to be brought to the site and the site would have to stay running 24/7. So we actually designed them systematically so that initially there would be only two like chopsticks holding up this great big folded steel plate, which in itself is structural. There are ship-making facilities in the St. Lawrence River who are able, St. Lawrence Seaway, are able to bend large Richard Serra-like plates. So this is actually figured out to fit on the back of a 16-wheeler on the diagonal. I like the kind of anthropomorphic push, pull, the kind of sense of the bones of this working. There's this difference in scale between the entrance for the human going through the skin and, of course, big, large trucks going through the canopy. This was an enormous project for such a small office. I think we did it, we were about 12 people. You know, it's 10 or 15 acres and millions of dollars. But you can see the extent of the operations on the site, all happening while the way people could come and go through from Canada to the United States. There is a certain lightness and a little sharpness to, oh, here we go. The guy who flew this plane with us, unfortunately died. But, where's the little button? There it is. Get ready. So I've never shown this before because I couldn't figure out how to get it on my little laptop. But basically this gives you an idea, unlike a fancy photograph from the ground, about the complexity of what's going on in the border station and the orchestration of movement. In a minute, this is the passenger inspection. That's the building with the glass in it. This is the X-ray building that you kept. But you can begin to see cars moving around. And in a moment, you'll see a truck heading, I can't see it from here, but a truck heading up to go through the commercial facility up here. There he is. Architects, you know, what you're doing in school here, actually you can continue to do wherever you work. And I find it amazing that 6 or 7 people in our office were able to figure out how to do this, make all the drawings, supervise the construction, and actually get an airplane to take the pictures. So there's a moment here when the wing comes down. Yeah, well. Anyway. We did another border station, which this picture actually got to the front page of the A1 edition of the New York Times, below the fold. But not for the architecture, but for the fact that the words United States were removed from the face of a building which was at the Canadian border. And Lori and I were totally amazed about the fact that that would happen. This is what it looked like before. This is Messina. It's the coldest place in New York State. It's also the site of the Eisenhower locks, and it was the alternative location for the United Nations. And very run down. This is what the public from Canada saw when they came. We began to think about this glass again. Here's an early sketch where you can see the glass facing north again, trying to get light from behind. These were not successful. There were all kinds of conflicts about how this operates. You'll see there's a truss over here. There's this sort of T-shaped organization. The happiest part of this project was the earth berms. We began to realize, because this was a recovered site, it's dirty earth, brownfield. So we thought, okay, we will use the brownfield, and we thought about it at night because of the 24/7 operations and daytime. We actually made a little animation, which is how we went there and did the stop frame to see what happened when it went from day to night. And I don't know whether that's successful or not. It's a little too fast, but we were thinking in those terms. Ancillary buildings. This one came after the first one, which was all glass. And as you can see, the yellow people here are in peril of being shot. So they're behind block walls. But there's a scrim that works over, this polycarbonate facade that works over and produces the sense of transparency which we were interested in maintaining. We also thought about the color yellow. Being at the border, this is a border station, and actually there are these areas of the pavement that are painted yellow. And they're areas where you shouldn't really go, but you can go in case of emergency. So they're areas in the margins. It's kind of a language that people recognized in the highway. So we brought the color yellow inside the building so that people could use the word yellow and the color to direct them as they go through. Supposing you get out of your car and you only speak Quebecois, and the guard talking to you is speaking English. he can get you at least to where you go by using color. Translucency and transparency. We are very interested in this, and that this is the penultimate project I think I'm going to show you, where we were developing kind of building skin that had a very high R value, yet allowed light through it. And this is a polycarbonate extrusion that's used in factories. This is a plan of Messina. There's a bridge, the previous facility, and actually our new bar or filter. And then you can see we changed the roadway. The color yellow. I finally realized when I looked at this picture why the government wanted to put the border station here. That is the Alcoa aluminum manufacturing plant that uses the electric power from St. Lawrence Seaway. And on the other side, over here, is the General Motors plant that makes Humvees. So somebody figured out that this particular bridge was very critical for American defense. All I thought was that they wanted to fix the old building. Anyway, in this case, we use this material to bring light through again. So here's the presence of yellow. And we made an incredibly thin canopy to give you a sense of lightness. We contrasted the thinness of the canopy. Remember the brick project in Brooklyn? Well, we are beginning to think about actually durable and opaque surfaces in their orchestration. There are no sidewalks. We actually produced areas of safety for pedestrians through color and a change of material from a solid asphalt to a kind of rubber gravel, which is permeable. This is a real photograph. The building does come to a point. This is a very thin canopy. Materials, you mentioned detail. You don't get to see much detail when you look in an architectural magazine, or if you wander around in the city and you can't get close to a building. The buildings are made out of things, and we managed to think about actually this sharp edge of the canopy coming close to the building's eye, which is from Chine Andalou, which is from a movie. This is it. So I kind of like that noise, you know? It sounds like war. So this is flying around and looking at the back of the building. What works amazingly enough is that this whole operation works not only with General Motors over here, but a major bridge to Canada. And we organized the building in such a way that it could supervise and oversee all of the different operations of trucks and pedestrians and automotive cars coming in. As I said, the guy that flew this airplane crashed about 2 months ago, but I thought I'd mention what a wonderful pilot he was when we flew with him. He instructed the border guards on how to fly their own airplanes. Then I was in Maine, and I was just kicking around. Can you hear this? I don't know the speakers in this thing. And I turned on the TV. Can you hear that? What a pity. What?
We could hear it, but
Oh,
we couldn't distinguish.
why don't I play it again?
I figured you can't really, you can hear it, but it's a little bit like the airplane noise. You can't really tell what they're saying.
Okay, well, they are saying that I got this on tape, this is great. Okay, it's going to go on the internet, that's great, and the GSA is going to find it, and Homeland Security is going to put me in jail. Basically, we put the letters United States embedded in that facade, right, behind the polycarbonate, to give it some life. And they were rendered in the color yellow like the pavement. And we thought it was a wonderful way to announce that the building was all of those things together. However, somebody took it upon themselves to think that there was a possibility that somebody could come up to that building and shoot at, bomb, or burn the letters. We call that the Cole effect. There was a battleship Cole in, I think, Yemen, and a bunch of guys drove a rubber boat up to it and blew themselves up and made a big hole in the side of an American destroyer. That photograph went around the world in no time on the internet, showing that the United States was not invincible. So what I'm showing you here is the power of architecture in a positive or a negative way. But our architecture is part of our culture, and it represents us politically, economically, and lots of other ways, as well as joy and beauty. And the government themselves had these letters removed. They're not there to this day. They're gone. Is that all? Okay. Other public spaces. This is Lower Manhattan. Louise Nevelson. We started at the same time the World Trade Center site started, and we finished first. We made some benches that were light fixtures, just tiny details, so you can sit on them at night and you don't, trip on the benches. We also did a plan for the Olympics and a ferry station in Lower Manhattan. My partner, Lori Hawkinson, is not here. This is a piece that she did in the early 90s called the Freedom of Expression National Monument. You can probably figure out that we are fairly politically motivated. And this was built on Battery Park City before Battery Park City was made, and the cone actually aimed at Wall Street. It seems things are coming back. People are now screaming at Wall Street again. The final project, which is not in my CV that I want to show you, is actually something that's about to start construction. And our project is here. It's a small building that houses ambulances, a part of the fire department in the city of New York. This is a derelict part of Bronx. Interesting enough, this looks like a garbage dump, but it isn't. It's a little garden. It's a community garden. There's one house left over, and there's a bunch of projects nearby that look down on the site. There were various constraints which led to a most peculiar configuration of the building. And because you notice people would be looking down on it, we replaced the roof with actually a green roof and a cistern to collect the water. The motivation of this particular project to be built or designed in the city of New York was to give hope to some of these communities in the Bronx that are really bereft of support services. And it was a difficult situation, the fact that we were taking a strip of the community garden away and replacing it with an ambulance facility. We used all kinds of drawings to think about transparency and actually the spaces underneath the edges, which you'll see in a minute. This is the, you're not getting the whole picture, are you? Well, no. In any case, the same polycarbonates used, and the project actually floats above the center portion. There's even a place for picnics. Illumination at night, transparency. We're very proud of this little project. There were 28 projects in New York City, part of the DDC's program to improve the city. Young architects were doing them. Only 2 survived. This is one of them because of the cutbacks. We make drawings all the time to try to convey how this fits in the city, and you notice that this is very carefully worked out to see the inner bays, the spaces here. It allows the viewer actually to get himself or herself into the project, to appreciate the plan, the section, the elevation, the materials, and the lighting all at once. So it's not actually a representational photograph rendering, but actually a constructed point of view. So this is my last slide. So I'm going to stop, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you. There are never any questions.
I'll open with a question over here because I was just wondering, as far as the design process is concerned, because there seems to be such a rich attention to details and the effects of different materials, is that part of the generative process up front, or does that happen later, or how do you work at those different scales of engagement?
Oh, I am a firm believer in daylight. And actually, we pass most of our time, as you do, you are very lucky to pass most of your time in this terrific building, which is full of light and action and material sensibility, isn't it? And so, at the onset, I can't just envision a project being material-less or light-less. And it's a constant battle for us to introduce daylight, and you know, the daylight coming from the south to the north. That was, there are very few actually daylight hours at the Canadian border. It's a different latitude, longitude, latitude. So the skin of our buildings are imbued with the agenda of their program. Remember the first one, 53rd Street. It's folded, it's discreet, it's intelligent, right? It's working, it's the eye, as Corb said, right? The eyes of the buildings are the windows. Now we've experimented with separating the skin of the building into scrims and made them habitable, that one project. But basically I think that the exterior of a building and its materiality is absolutely, totally important. And thinking of a building in pure volume without that aspect. The other one, of course, is it's easy to do a project that's going to cost a lot of money. And at Messina, we came onto this amazing property, this material. And that project, you don't want to hear this, but we were approached by several large firms to be in collaboration because it came in so far under budget, somebody figured we'd come upon a secret. So all I told you was it's polycarbonate, that's not enough. And you'll find each architect, after a while, we get to have a sort of host of materials that we're used to their performance. Yeah, that's all. Any questions?
Other questions?
Don't you think it's amazing that the American government would take the name of the country off the building at the border? I guess you don't anymore, right? That's just somebody else doing that. I mean, I found it totally shocking that we were actually afraid to announce the name of our country at our border.
So was this part of the Design Excellency initiative, or was this decided by someone else?
We came up with the idea. Our client, these programs, there's something called Design Excellence. There was.
But I'm sorry, the decision to remove it, did they run that by the Design Excellency Commission?
They told the commission that it had to come off the building. And fortunately, we happened to be there with the architecture editor of the New York Times the day they were unscrewing the letters. And fortunately, it got on it's interesting. I find it personally amazing that architecture can have such cultural power. Even in, Lincoln Center, that's very serious cultural power. But you'd think that someone would be, that putting the name on a building in the boonies would be a political issue. So the architecture that you make and what we do actually is imbued with culture. We can't get away from it. You know, big box stores, they're a kind of culture, and the architecture, some architects do, is involved with more than that. And our practice is about that. No more questions, okay. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Please join us for the reception in the gallery.